As I showed in the first video, this cockpit is pretty shattered. Like, I don't know if that's because of all the moves and just sitting around, but anyway, I'm starting the process of piecing it together, and yeah, we'll go from there. Okay, so it's been a minute since I've been working on the F-14, but I'm getting close. So what I'm gonna show here is some more stuff in the cockpit. So I figured out how I'd like to screw my seat down. So I seared a block of wood onto the bottom and sanded the paint off, created a really rough texture on the plastic, and then glued this down. And this is fairly stiff and it's not going anywhere. On the front here there's also a tiny screw, if you can see that, and that is reinforced on the bottom with a piece of wood that's also been seared into place. And the idea is that since this cockpit is going to fit in the Skymaster as a whole, just like this is the front section, I wanted a way to make it removable. So the way this works is first we install the tub, then there is the dash that sits up here. But in order for that dash to get in place, I cannot have the stick in place. So all of those three parts, so the cockpit, the dash, and the yoke, need to be able to be assembled, as well as the seat, of course, to be assembled separately. And so that's what this block of wood does, and this tiny screw here does. And what it means is you insert this into the jet, and I'll show you if I haven't shown that already. And then once that's in place, you insert the dash into place, because the dash will fit with this in place. And then once those two things are in place, then there's a hole on the bottom here, and from the top of the cockpit you just feel for that, and there's a spot where it doesn't want to move at. And once you have that, you just slowly turn this around, sort of just like that, very gently, and it just wants to sit, and you can see it's very solid. And then once that's in place, we're gonna grab our seat, and then for the seat it just goes all the way forward, and you can see that there's a hole. Let's see if I can show this better on camera. There's a hole on the block of wood right there. So right in here you can see there's a hole, and the seat just gets screwed down into that hole, and you have the entire cockpit in place. So I'll show how this all works together in a little bit, but I just wanted to document. So I have the cockpits, and I'm gonna show how these get installed into the plane. I'm not a fan exactly of how this cockpit fits, but it does fit. Just so I can show what that looks like, so this is the front section. I trimmed it, and you can see I added some supports just because the plastic is a little bit fragile. And then I added this piece of wood here, and that's what's gonna secure the yoke. And you can see there's a screw, I've shown that before, and a block of wood, and that's what the pilot seats glues to. In the back I had to open this up because the steering servo, when it is down there, it did interfere with it a little bit, but I figured since it's not going to be really visible, that's okay. So that's what this opening is, and that's it. Now to install this, let's move this closer here, is a bit of a process, but I tried to make it, you know, the simplest that I could without chopping up the cockpit into little bits. And so what happens is the gear needs to be sort of in that position, not upright and not down. So just like lying, sitting there with sort of this guy, because this guy can be up as far back as possible. And then with that in place, I could just take the cockpit, insert it sideways in, just like that. And it takes a little bit of finagling, gotta get this wire out of the way. And on the front here there's a, let's see if I can show that. On the front here there is a brace all the way sort of in there. You can see that piece of wood there that holds the tub from the front. So once it's been slid in like that, we just have to maneuver it very gently, and you can see that servo is still not interfering. And once we're in, we just gently get let's see, the front portion of the cockpit, so right here, to just go underneath the screws, just gently push it, and now the cockpit is pretty much in place. And with that, I can then lift it and have it seat right on top of these tabs that are on the side. So tab here and a tab on the other side. So essentially that's where the cockpit's going to go in. So that's the first part. And as you can see, let's see, we can show both sides. You have the cockpit sitting underneath those canopy locking cylinders on both sides right there. So once that's done, it's time to install the dash. So the front dash, this is the front dash, nothing unusual, just cut to the shape that'll fit, and that goes in fairly easy. So you just take this off of so it can sit down like that. That servo is still in a relaxed position, as you can see, and then we can install the dash and have it sit right there. Once the dash is installed, then I can pull this entire assembly up. I'm gonna push that in, and now that entire assembly sits up on top of the tabs, and essentially the part of the cockpit is in. And now we're gonna attach the yoke, which goes, let's zoom in here so we can see. So there's this tiny screw down here, and that's where the yoke is gonna mount to. And as I'd shown before, on the bottom of the yoke there's a tiny hole, and that hole is threaded. So we just gently hold the dash back. Zoom in. We just gently hold the dash back and then secure, just get the yoke and then just screw it into place. About 3 turns. 1, 2, actually 2 turns is perfect. And with those 2 turns, the yoke is in position and the cockpit's in place. The next thing is a pilot seat. Pilot seat secures itself onto this with a screw in the middle. So I'm going to use my magnet to hold it in place. And then you just lower the pilot seat down. The hole is fairly large. We locate where it's going to fit onto the block of wood. And once that's done, we just secure the seat down. There, and it's not going anywhere. So that covers how to install the front tub. So now you can see that this is pretty locked in place. The yoke is pretty steady, it's not going to go anywhere. You can, in my case, you can turn this one more revolution, but I don't think it needs it. It's perfectly good the way it is. So now we're going to focus on the rear cockpit. The rear cockpit, and this one is a little bit more challenging in my opinion, but I'll show the mods that I made here. So again, I glued some pieces of wood to the front, and that is to just strengthen the tub and give it some strength up here. And then I added plywood to the sides, on both sides, and the reason for that is I have these ears here on both sides, and that's where these will screw down into. And then we had the block of wood that was glued in here, and that's for the pilot seat that's gonna sit in here. We don't need to take the yoke out on this one, it goes in pretty good. And then on the back I added again plywood, and that's what the screws that are on top, so you can see a screw hole. Let's see if you can zoom in there. So here's one screw hole, and here's the other one, and those will eventually grab onto these blocks of wood in there. So to install this cockpit, here's what we do. We're gonna take the cockpit and then we're gonna twist it, tilt it just like that. Yeah. And for this one, the gear can be all the way down, doesn't matter. And we stick it in here. And then what happens is we gently, just gently push. So you can see this side right here. We just gently push and get that underneath. The cockpit has enough flex to allow that to happen. So once the cockpit is in this position, the next thing that I want to do is sort of get this is the left side, and just gently bring that up above the holder here. Just takes a little bit, just very gently, and then once I do that, I can then just bring the whole cockpit to the front very, very slowly and gently. And now that cockpit is sitting in its place. And what I'm gonna do next is get there's 2 small screws, and those go in the hole. So we just grab the cockpit. We can line up the hole on the fuselage with the hole on the cockpit, and you can see, maybe you can't see it, I put a block of wood underneath where the screws are going to go right here, so that you're not just screwing into the fiberglass. There's actually some wood support that the screw has to go through before it grabs the cockpit on the bottom. So we just secure that in. That's one down, and then we do the same thing on the opposite side. You line up the screw, prop the cockpit up, and we secure that down. Not too tight, we don't need to go through the fiberglass, just enough. And you can see that is pretty sturdy. The next step is to secure the 2 screws that go in the front. And what I like to do here is just, I can look through the holes here and sort of line up the screws. And I'll start with the one in the right, and that goes right in. And then the one on the left here, because the way the dash sits, it needs to go in between these holes, so I kind of stretch this a bit. Not too much, but so I just grab onto this and I look through the top and stretch it just enough to see the hole on the mounting tab on the bottom, and then we secure that down. And that's it. So the cockpit in the back is secure. And so the next thing here is the pilot seat. Again, the only mod that I did here was add a piece of wood on the bottom, just to provide some strength. But that needs to be secured in place. So we have a small screw that holds that down, and so that's this guy right here. And since I added that block of wood, I don't need a very tall screw, so I just line up with the hole right here and secure that down nice and tight, not too tight, but just enough, so that's not gonna go anywhere.